Hello everyone and welcome to yet another unconventional coding session. In today's video, I'm going to be creating a ChatGPT clone in C. Now, I'm not a C programmer by any means, but recently I've been watching a lot of Tsoding streams, as you might notice from my intro. And that makes me basically an expert in C. So let's jump right into it. So let's start by just creating a main.c and writing just a hello world in C, just as a sanity check. So we are going to include stdio, and we are going to do int main, and we are going to return 0, and before that we are going to printf hello world, and a new line. And we are going to gcco main.c, and if we run this, then we get hello world. Yes, everything is working properly. Now I'm going to be using RayLib to create the graphics for this ChatGPT clone. So we are going to include raylib.h. And what are we going to do next? We have to initialize the window. And we are going to set some sort of window height and window width. And of course, this should be the other way. So window width is the first one, and then window height is the second one. And we need some title, so let's call this ChatGPT C. And let's define these window width and window height. Let's set the width to 800 and let's set the height to 600. And we are going to need a loop here. So we are going to say while not window should close. We are going to do something. And in the end, we are going to close window. I guess we have to call this to free up some memory or something, which I guess would be freed anyway when the program closes, but let's do it anyway. And here we have to say begin drawing, and we have to say end drawing. And let's just try to compile this and see if it will work. Now we are going to have to add lraylib to our compile command. And it compiled, and if we run main, then here we have a window. Now I want it to be a little bit bigger, so let's make it 152 by 768. And let's compile it again and run it, and that is a bit better. I still want it to be a little bit bigger because I want you to actually see something. So perhaps I could add some kind of like scale factor here, because I am not that good at math that I cannot calculate in my head what should be the correct width and height to keep the same aspect ratio, although I'm not sure if I care about the aspect ratio. So let's do scale factor and let's do 1.3, and let's compile this and let's run it, and that is a very nice and big window. I hope you can see that. So let's continue. We should have some sort of background. We do not want a black background. So let's clear the background with a color, and let's call it background color. And let's define that as well. So let's do define background color, and it will be a color of, let's say, 69, 69, 69, and 255. And let's compile this again and let's run it. And that is a nice gray background. Now ChatGPT has a sidebar here, so let's create a sidebar. I am in fact going to create a function. Let's call it sidebar draw. Now I'm not sure about this naming convention, what I should be using. Now RayLib uses this very weird capitalization here, but I think it is a good thing to see which functions are RayLib related and what are our own function. So I will just call it like this, and I will say sidebar draw instead of draw sidebar, because maybe we want to have more actions on the sidebar, so then would be nice if they all start with the same thing, in my opinion. And we are not going to pass anything to the function. I'm just going to define it here, and this is going to be a void function sidebar draw, and in this function we are going to draw a rectangle. And we are going to set it to the position of 0, 0, and let's do window width times 0.3. I might in fact make this a definition as well. So let's do sidebar width, and I am going to add it here. Define sidebar width to be this way, and I am actually going to change this that way just so I can see better where the definition ends, because it's the same color here. And I am then going to add the last one, which is the color. So let's define also a sidebar color. And did I write something wrong? Why is it this squiggly? I think it's fine. And I am going to define the sidebar color. So let's define sidebar color as a color which will be a little bit darker than the background. So it should then be something like 45, 45, 45, 255. And I should have the height as well, which I forgot. So we have X, Y, width, and height, right? Yes. So let's define, well, we're not going to define sidebar height because it should be the height of the window. So we're going to use get render height. And for some reason we have these squigglies here, but I think that is just the VS Code plugin being slow. So let's try and compile this, and we actually do get a warning. So what is the warning here? I added a semicolon in the definition which should not be there. So let's remove that and let's compile it again, and now it's compiled, and if we run main, then we have a window with an actual sidebar. So that looks very nice. And I would like to be able to resize the window, but I can't right now. So we have to set some config. So let's set here, set config flags. And it is something resizable. Flag window resizable. So if we do this and we compile this again and we run it, then hopefully I can resize it, which I cannot. I'm not sure why that happens. Let's see if we have to set the config flags before we initialize the window. That would make sense. And now we can actually resize the window. And it looks nice. Now we could make the sidebar actually 0.3 times get render width. And if we now compile it and we run it, then now it will actually respond as we resize the window. So now we have a responsive desktop design in C. But I don't think I want this because the actual ChatGPT UI doesn't do this anyway. So I am just going to make it fixed. But I will still calculate 30% from the width that I set up there. So if we compile and run, we have now this beautiful beginning of a ChatGPT clone. So next I would like to add a bar here where we can type in some text. So an input field. Now in RayLib, you cannot create an input field directly. There's no function for drawing an input. But there is a RayGUI extension for RayLib. So we can include RayGUI.h. And maybe I had to do it like this. I never remember how to do this. And then I have to define RayGUI implementation. And let's see, can I do it like this? And if I then try to compile this, we get some sort of warnings. We don't have RayGUI. So if we use the quotes, then I think we have to have the file there. And we cannot find the file. So let's download the file. I think it is in the GitHub repository of RayGUI. So let's just git clone https github.com/ I think it's raysan5/RayGUI. And let's do depth equals 1. So we are going to download only the latest things. And here we should have in the source RayGUI.h. So I guess we can then do RayGUI/src/RayGUI.h. And if we then compile this again, we get an error because we don't have floorf function. So we need to add lm to include the math library, and then it will actually compile. So probably at this point we should create some sort of build script. So let's do build.sh, and I'm going to put this here, and Then I can chmod plus x build.sh, and then I can run build.sh and main. So that will compile and run it. Great. So now that we have also RayGUI installed, then now we should be able to draw a text input. So let's say message input draw, and let's create that function as well. So this will be void message input draw, if I can write message. And we have to use GUI input, text input box. So we have to set the bounds, which will be a rectangle, and we have to set a title. Wait a minute, this is not the function I want. Text box. Okay, wait a minute. What is the difference between text box and text input box? I have been using text box recently, so I will use that right now as well. Maybe I have to look into text input box. But anyway, this one will take also the bounds and then the text. Now the text will be like a text buffer. So this text box will write the text that you type into it into this buffer. That's how it stores the text. So we have to pass that in. So let's call it text buffer. And let's set the size of the buffer. I guess this will limit RayGUI from adding too much text into the buffer. So we are going to probably set something like message max len. And let's define that here. Let's say define message max len. And let's set it to like 2048, something like this. Just an arbitrary number. I guess we will have 2 kilobytes of memory available to us. So what else do we have to do? We have to pass in edit mode, and we do want edit mode, so we set it to true so that we can edit what is in the text box. Now I feel like this is the wrong thing. I should be using the input box because this text box behaves a bit weirdly. But let's use it for now because I have been using it in the past, so I know how it works. So we are going to set then the rectangle of the bound, which will be a rectangle, and it will have an x and a y position, and then it will have the width and the height. So what is the x position? If we run this, we want the x position to be the width of the sidebar plus some kind of gap. So let's do that. Let's say that I will actually create an int x, which will be sidebar width plus UI gap, which I will define here. So let's define UI gap to be like 20 pixels. And then we have to define the y. So the y should be all the way down in the bottom, minus the UI gap again, minus the height of the text input, and that's it. So let's set this to get render height. Now, I'm not sure if I can just call this get render height or if I should call this get render height just anywhere, or should I call it once and then pass that along? Is this like optimized somehow? I guess it is. So I'm just going to call it when I need it. And I'm going to minus the UI gap from this, and I will minus the message box height or message input height. Message input height, which I will again define. Let's define message input height to be like 60. And then I can pass the x here and the y here, and we have to also have the message input width, which I will set width, and I will set the message input height, and we have to calculate the width. Now the width will be this area minus UI gap from both sides. So it's the width of the window minus the sidebar width minus UI gap times 2. So let's do that. Int width is going to be get render width minus UI gap times 2 minus sidebar width. And that should work. And then of course we have the text buffer, so we have to pass it in as a char pointer text buffer. And then what we can do is we can set that buffer here. So let's do char user message buffer, let's call it. And let's set the max width. Message max length. Sorry, not max width, maximum length of the message. Now I think we have to zero this out somehow. So what I've been doing is I've just set this to a string with a null character. I'm not sure if this is the right way, or should I use strcopy to copy a null character in there, or what? Because I've had problems where I'm guessing there is something already in the memory position that this allocates for the text, and then that text will be put into the message input. Something like that. Let me know in the comments if I'm doing this wrong or how I should be doing this. And then we can pass the user message buffer in here. So let's pass in user message buffer. And I guess we don't have to add the ampersand here because a char is always a pointer, something like that. So let's see what will happen. So I'm going to build and run it. And look at this. We have a message box here, but it is a very horrible color and the text is very small. So let's fix that. So how do we do this? We need to set some config flags again, or it's not config flags, it's something else. It is set, it is a style, GUI set style, and then we pass in something. Now I'm going to look into the raylib, the RayGUI.h, and I'm going to search for set GUI set style, GUI set style. And there's a place here where we are setting all of the stuff, the default stuff. So it is somewhere in here. Here we are setting all the default stuff. So let's find what we want. Okay, here we are setting all the different kind of colors. So we have a normal and we have a focused and pressed. Now, for some reason, the pressed one is the one we need for this input. I'm not sure why it is pressed and why it is not normal or focused, but we are going to copy these and we are going to set them here. And what I will actually do is I will make the border transparent, or actually I could probably set the border width to 0, so you don't have to set the color. So let's just set the border width to 0, and I will actually set the base color to transparent because I want to have rounded borders, and I do not believe that I can create rounded borders with RayGUI, with the text input. So I will set it to 0, 0, 0, 0. That should be transparent. And text shall be white. So FF, 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 FF. So let's see and build and run this. And we still have the cursor here. And the text is very tiny, but it is on a transparent background, and we have a white color of the font. Now this is very weird about raylib, that when I hit backspace, it removes everything. I'm not sure what is going on there. Or does it actually, should I set like FPS, target FPS, and I'm not sure what we need as an FPS for this kind of application. I will just set 24. That should be enough. Does that actually change? It does, because normally it is running very quickly, so when I hit backspace once, it will actually register many times. So now we can actually remove one letter at a time. But again, the font size is very small. So let's do this. Let's first load a font. So let's say font is load font. And we are going to use Ubuntu for this. And I think it's called Ubuntu r.ttf. And I am going to copy it from my user share fonts Ubuntu, and Ubuntu, it's not there. Where is it? It is in true type Ubuntu, Ubuntu r.ttf here. So now we should have it here, Ubuntu r.ttf. So we are going to load that, and we are going to set the default font, which is done somehow. Font. Let's find get font default. Can we go to the definition? We cannot. There's actually an unload font function, so we probably should unload the font in the end. Unload font, and we will pass in the font. And let me try and find where the default font is set. Font. Font. How do we find the default font? Let's find the default style. Style default. Load style default. So is there a font here? I cannot see a font here. Here we have GUI font. What is GUI font? Where is that defined? Is that a global thing? GUI font, get font default. So it should come from this. So is it in Rayleigh then? Can I set font default? No, set default. How do I set the font? Okay, let's ask ChatGPT. How do I set the default font for RayGUI? Okay, we can set the font just like I did, and GUI set font. Is that true? Do we have GUI set font? We do have GUI set font, so we are going to use that. So GUI set font. And let's try to compile and run this. And we in fact changed the font, but it's still very small. So let's find again the set style, and there is a font, default font size. Is there a font size somewhere? Did I set the font size in the actual drawing of the text box? No, there's just buffer size. So how do I set the font size? Let's ask ChatGPT again. How do I set the font size of GUI text box? We set it by GUI text box set style. Is that correct? Let's see. Do we have this function? We do not have this function, so this is just hallucinated by ChatGPT. Now, I have done this previously, so I know that there is a way to do it. I just don't remember how to do it. So I will find font again here. And here we actually have text size. So that is probably what we are looking for. So let's add it here. And let's add a comment here that these are actually for the input box. Although these are global styles, but this is the only way that I can edit the input box style. So styles for message input. Okay, and let's set this text size to some sort of constant. So let's say input font size. And let's add it here. I'll actually call it message input font size. And let's make it like 25. And let's call it message input font size. And let's build and run this. And look at this. We have larger text, but I might want it to be a little bit larger even than this. So I am going to change it to 30 because I'm making a video. So if you're watching on a phone, you might not see that. And wait a minute, that is funny. Why is it so slow? Is that because I set it to 25 frames per second? Very interesting. So let me set this to 60 frames a second. Does it have to be even more? Am I writing 60 frames a second? That seems to be pretty good. So we can then continue and add a rounded rectangle to the background of this. So let's do that. Now I think I want to actually move this thing up a bit, and it's very weird how this cursor works. I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong or is really just this buggy. But anyway, I am going to continue. I am going to, before drawing the GUI text box, I am going to draw rectangle rounded. And I will use the same bounds, although probably not because I have to move them separately. So let's set this to text bounds, and let's set another one that is the background bound. So this will be drawn in background bounds, and roundness will be 0.5 f. I'm not sure if I have to add f in there to make it a float, maybe. And segments is 1. I don't know what segments means, but I know that if I set it to 1, it looks good. So then we are going to set a color, which will be message input background. And I am going to define that here. Define message input background. And it will be a color that will be darker than the background but lighter than the sidebar. So let's set it to 55, 55, 55 to 55. And we need to change this to text bounds. And I believe I want to move this up a bit, but let's see how much I have to move it. So let's compile and run it. And now I can type here, but it looks a little bit weird. So what I will do is I am going to subtract something from the text bounds height so that the cursor will be smaller. Now, I'm not going to define anything here. I'm not sure how to define this. I'll just subtract 10. Or maybe I should use percentages or something. I'm not sure. And I'm going to actually make the message input a bit taller. And I guess I could define like a message input padding to be that 10. And then subtract that from here. And then if I build and run it, it will look like this. Now, maybe it's a little bit too big right now. So I am going to set it to 65 and I'll add more padding. And now it's still in the wrong place, but now the cursor looks a little bit better. I will add a little bit more padding. 25. Maybe that's too much. That looks pretty good. But now I want it to be lower and to the right. So I am going to make it go down half of the padding. So text bounds X will be message input padding divided by 2. And the same thing for the Y. And now if I build and run it, then now it's smack dab in the middle of the box. And it looks nice. Now, of course, we cannot send this. Nothing happens. So let's implement that next so that we can actually send some message. And we are still responsive, so this is nice. But before that, I am going to change this a bit nicer because these lines are very long. So let's do that and this. That looks maybe a little bit nicer. So now we want to be able to send messages. So we should have some sort of place in memory where we save the messages. So let's create a two-dimensional array of characters. Let's call this messages. And I'm going to set a max messages. So this is a limit on how many messages we can have visible on the screen, or it's just saved into a conversation. Now, later on, we might figure out a way that we don't have to have this arbitrary limit, but for now, we are going to do it this way. And then we should have, for each of the messages, a maximum length of the message. So let's say message max length. We actually have it there already. But we have to define max messages, which I will define here. Let's define max messages and just define it as 255 for now. And we should have some sort of count of the messages. So let's do int message count is 0 at the moment. And I saw that in the message input, the GUI text box, it says returns true on enter pressed. So perhaps we could return this, and this actually returns an int. So let's return an int. So then we can use this to detect when we want to send it. So we can just say here, if message input draw, but I don't really like how that sounds. If message input draw, then do something. So I'm not going to do it this way. It's a nice thing that they added that feature, that it returns it, but I think I am going to do it separately. So I'm just going to add here, if is key pressed, enter, and the user message buffer is not, it's not a null character. And I have to dereference this, I believe. So this means if we have a message and we press enter, it should be key enter, then we are going to send the message. And what we are going to do here is we are going to add a message to the messages. I will actually call this message list. And then I will say message list add. And I will pass a reference to the message list. Although when it's a char, maybe I don't need to have a reference because it's always a pointer. I think. Something like that. So I will pass in the message list and I'll pass in the message count. And this one I will pass as a reference so that I can edit it from inside this thing. And then I'm going to define this function, void message list add. And this will take char star. Actually, I believe that this needs to just be the message list this. Sorry, char message list, max messages, max message length. And we have a pointer, int pointer to the message count. And what we are going to do is we are going to say that message list index message count will equal to some message. But we actually cannot do it this way. So we have to pass in the message here. So char star message, but we can't just set it to that because this message will be the message buffer, but the message buffer will change later. So we can't use that because then it will also change the message that is put into the message list. So we have to copy the message from the buffer into the message list. So we have to do strcpy. And probably better is to use strncpy. So we set the maximum length that we're going to copy. Now I guess it shouldn't matter because we are still setting the max message length in both of these, but let's do it anyway. So this will take the destination and the source and then the length, how much we are going to copy. So the destination is this and the source is the message and the size is max message max length. And we need to dereference the message count because it is a pointer, but we want the actual number of the index. And then we have to do message count plus plus. And we have to dereference this, I guess. Do we even have to add like parentheses here? I'm not sure. Because we don't want to increment the pointer, we want to increment the actual number. I'm not sure what is the order of operations here. Perhaps we can just do this. Now we could just add it here to make it maybe nicer or maybe worse. And then we want to actually remove or empty the message. So we can say message, we can do strcpy message null, I guess. So we are going to copy a string with a null character in the beginning into the message. So then that will essentially remove it. So now we just have to pass in the user message buffer into this message list add, and it should work. But of course we are not drawing anything. So let's actually try and compile this. It still compiles, but nothing happens. I mean, it disappears now when we hit enter, but it doesn't go anywhere. So we have to draw the messages. So let's do that. Let's say, I will in fact put it here in the same place with all the other draw functions. Message list draw. And we of course have to pass in the message list. And we have to pass in the message count. And perhaps that is all. So how do we draw the messages? Let's create a void message list draw. And we will pass in the message list again this way. And we are going to pass in the message count. This time it is not a pointer because we just want the count and we don't have to change the amount of messages. And what are we going to do? We are going to loop through all of the messages. So for int I is 0, I less than message count, I plus plus. And then the char message will be message count index, message list index I. And then we need to print it out. So let's draw some text. And the text will be the message. And the position will be what? Well, if we run this again, we want the messages to start up here. So the X will be again the width of the sidebar plus the UI gap. And Y will be the UI gap at first. And then we have to move it down. So let's set here int X is sidebar width plus UI gap. And int Y is going to be UI gap. And then we're going to draw the text at X and Y. with a font size. So let's define a font size. Message font size and a color. So message color. Let's do that. And let's define those. Let's define the color first up here with the other colors. Message color. And this will be a color of white. Let's make it white. And then we are going to define message font size, which will be actually probably the same as the message input font size, but I will still make them separate if we want to change to be different. And then of course, after each of these messages, we need to increment the Y position so that the next message will be lower than this. So it will plus equal the text height. But what is the text height? You might ask. Well, we can actually calculate the text height. Now, it might just be font size plus a little bit of margin. In fact, we have to add some kind of message gap, let's say. And let's set that here. Define message gap, which might be the same as the UI gap. I will in fact set it to 20 right now. But what I will actually do is I will measure the text. So in RayLib, we have this thing called measure text. And in fact, we have to use measure text X because we want to specify a font. And perhaps there's a draw text X as well. So we have to in fact do that. So we have to pass in a font, and I think the others are the same. In fact, they are not the same. So we have font, we have the text, and then we have a vector 2 of the position, and we have a spacing, and then the color. So I will set the spacing to 0, and I will define the position. So let's do position, and vector 2 position is going to be a vector 2 of X and Y. And we need also the font, so we have to pass it in here. So let's say font. Actually, can we use that get default font? Because we set the font here. So can we just get it from get font default? I wonder if that will actually work. Where is this defined? In RayLib. But this was GUI set font. Is there set font here? There's no font. So it probably won't work. So I will pass it in for now. Let's pass in the font in here. Font. Now I'm not sure if I should have a pointer to the font or the font. I don't quite understand what it means to pass as value. Is there, because I have to pass it as value here, but I feel like passing stuff as a value is not a good thing. I'm not sure why. But if I do this, then I'm going to have to dereference it. But I'm not sure what is the point then. If I still have to dereference it, then maybe I can just pass it in like this. Let's see if we can do it. And maybe the compiler will warn us if we cannot do that. So we are going to pass the font into measure text X as well. And we are going to pass in the message and the message font size and the spacing, which is 0 now. I'm not sure if it's the spacing like this or like this, but let's set it to 0 for now. And this will return a vector 2, which will be the width and the height. So vector 2 text size is that. And then vector. Then the int text height is going to be text size dot y. And then we can draw it there and move it down the height of whatever we drew. And we have to pass the font here. So let's pass in the font. And let's compile and run this, and we got some warnings, so let's check them out. Initialization of char from char star makes integer from pointer without a cast. So line 63. Message is message list index I. I believe that this is because this is a pointer, so we need to dereference the pointer. Or we have to define this as a char star message, because this is a pointer already. I don't understand this thing, but trial and error always works with C, which is very frustrating because I really want to understand how this works. But now it works. So I guess I understand it then. So let's try to see. If we say hello, nothing happens. Why? Nothing happens even if I write anything here. So what is going on. Are we calling message list draw? We are. And we are calling message list add? Maybe. Let's add a printf here. Added message. And let's compile and run this, and let's say hello. And we in fact added a message. Okay. And let's add it afterwards, and let's do D here, and we will pass in the message count to see that we are actually incrementing the message count. So right now the message count is 0. Okay, we are not incrementing the message count for some reason. We are passing it as a reference, and we are here incrementing it. But now we probably need these parentheses here, so we need to dereference the message count and then add to it. Is that correct? Let's see. Again, trial and error. Hello. And look at this. We got a message up here. And if we send another message, it will go below it. And if we send even more and more, they will all come after each other. And if we just press enter, nothing happens. So we are not sending empty messages. But now it works. So that's pretty cool. But now I'm going to end this video here. In the next video, which I will post tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to integrate ChatGPT API into this so that we actually get a response back from ChatGPT. So if you want to see that video, then make sure to subscribe to my channel and you will see when I post it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.